Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Host Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. The local energy chamber in Trinidad and Tobago warns government. This story takes the lead in today's edition of Caribbean Perspective for Thursday, 22nd September 2022. Details when we return.
The hurricane season is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to think safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
Welcome back. A warning to the Trinidad and Tobago government and an expression of hope that the finance minister will reform oil and gas taxes on companies as promised. The call comes from the president of the Energy Chamber, Dr. Dax Driver. More from Nicole M. Romney of TV6's Energy Matters.
Trinidad and Tobago is said to be behind the times when it comes to getting to the point of net zero carbon emissions. Energy Chamber President Dr. Dax Driver says the demand for oil and gas is lessening and it's time to use what we have while it's still valuable.
And suddenly people are buying only electric cars and there's no gasoline cars being bought anymore. And that means that global demand will fall. So that the window for producing oil is narrowing. Every year it's narrowing. And we need to say, if we've got this resource which we want to sell to the world, we've got to start to produce it as quickly as we possibly can. Every year we waste is a potential that we're going to have oil left, which will have no market in the future.
He's hoping to see a restructuring of gas taxes or prices in the national budget next week. He says the stakeholders in the energy industry are waiting to see actual concrete proposals from government on these changes, noting that there is a bid round currently in execution. Dr. Driver says these adjustments are necessary in order to attract large companies to bid.
The system we have in place needs to make sense. There's various different price points. What we have at the moment in Trinidad's fiscal system, particularly for oil, gas, there's some different issues around the royalties, but for oil, we have this particular problem with something called the Supplemental Petroleum Tax, SPT, and the way that it kicks in when oil prices hit $50 for most producers. That means that anybody running the economics at $50, they are losing money, and people then are not going to assign capital to invest in Trinidad if they're going to be losing money at $50, because that's a price which you might well see again in the future.
The Chamber President wants to see these changes effected in the 2022-2023 fiscal package.
The bit of information which gives me confidence is a clear announcement from the Minister of Finance that oil and gas tax will be changed. The reforms which have been talked about will be implemented by the end of this year, so that as we go into next year, those will actually be in place in law, not talked about as an idea, but actually implemented.
Furthermore, Dr. Driver wants the SUD turned on a solar energy project that was promised 2 years ago. He clarifies that this is not the solar park for which the SUD was turned at Piarco. He adds that no construction has yet begun, but it will be the biggest in the Caribbean, and it would be great to get an agreement finalized. Nicole M. Romney, TV6 News.
Get together and hammer it out. The call from Industrial Court President Deborah Thomas Felix to government and labor as she identifies a social dialogue as a key to navigating workplace issues in a pandemic. Ms. Thomas Felix was addressing the opening of the new term of the Industrial Court. TV6's Urvashi Tiwari Rupnarayan has the details.
Industrial Court President Deborah Thomas Felix notes the surge in cases filed at her court since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, 2,516 to be exact.
This is so despite the fact that some sectors were closed due to public health measures. These figures tell a story and suggest that there is a need for more discussions and agreement in the workplace.
At this year's opening of the law term, the learned judge repeats the call she made on the very occasion last year, as a lack of genuine discussion, she says, was a main factor in the number of cases filed.
In Trinidad and Tobago, at the level of the workplace, there is a need for genuine, continuous bilateral discussions between trade unions and employers to address all issues, especially those related to changes in the modality of the work since the pandemic.
This year has not seen any improvement. 131 more cases were filed from September 2021 to September 2022 compared to the previous cycle.
As expected, throughout the pandemic, trade unions and employers alike sought the intervention of the industrial court for the resolution of issues.
Of the total matters filed for this year, trade disputes remain the largest category at 730. Retrenchment and severance disputes at 124. Occupational health and safety accounted for 111, and 58 industrial relation offenses were filed. The court was not able to keep up with its previous 107% disposal rate, dropping 34 percentage points lower, or disposing of 240 fewer cases than the year before. Thomas Felix urges parties to be guided by national interest, meet in good faith, hold genuine discussions, and reach consensus on workplace issues. On another matter, Judge Thomas Felix notes that public sector wage negotiations are underway and there is much anxiety amongst workers. Last year, there were 42 reports of collective breakdowns compared to 23 this year.
Always held the view that collective bargaining for new collective agreements must be contemporaneous to the period under review. One wonders what value can be derived by workers and also by employers when they negotiate for new terms and conditions some 7 or 10 years after the period in review. Often, the new negotiated terms bear little or no relevance.
She says she hopes some thought will be given to being more time relevant.
Indeed, there is nothing which prevents one of the partners engaged in collective bargaining from reporting a breakdown of negotiation either to the Minister of Labour or to the Minister of Finance, while at the same time commencing fresh negotiations for a collective agreement for the ensuing new period. There is no reason, in my mind, to wait until the expiration of 2 or 3 terms before making formal reports of a breakdown in negotiations.
And finally, addressing what she refers to as the elephant in the room, the president of the Industrial Court repeats her call last year to reconvene the National Tripartite Advisory Council.
I therefore repeat my call for constructive social dialogue between the tripartite partners with a view to strengthening the labor market and the workforce. It is imperative that the tripartite partners, who are in fact leaders in the world of work, set aside their differences and have that difficult but preliminary meeting and a much needed discussion on the elephant in the room with a view to resolve differences, to listen and to understand the different perspectives, and to agree to a structure of a viable working methodology at the level of the National Tripartite Advisory Council.
Last year, the Confederation of Trade Unions withdrew from the National Tripartite Council. Thomas Felix notes that from the correspondences reaching her, trust seems to be the main issue.
There has been a growing number of protests in this country, several of which are centered on what is perceived as social ills and lack of social amenities. In addition, there have been protests related to working conditions, job losses, and negotiations for new terms and conditions at work. The Tripartite Advisory Council needs to get to work. We cannot get back to the era of strikes.
It is in the national interest, she says, that these parties get together and work. Urvashi Tiwari Rupnarayan, TV6 News.
You're listening to Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. The private sector organization of Jamaica, PSOJ, has called again for effective short-term strategies to arrest the country's growing crime wave. Cordian Barrett of TVJ News reports.
It's too much to bear. That's the position of the private sector organization of Jamaica, PSOJ, regarding the crime rate across the island. It's why they are calling for the Andrew Holness-led government to implement some short-term measures to deal with the rampant acts of violence residents are facing. In a press release this morning, the PSOJ said the crime rate is becoming a burden, taking a serious psychological and physical toll on all citizens. According to the PSOJ, Jamaicans have been living in constant fear from the overt and senseless violence, which often claims lives and destroys families. The release comes after 9 people were shot, 3 fatally, in Spring Village, St. Catherine, Sunday afternoon. The victims were among scores of spectators at a football match in the community. To date, there have been over 1,100 murders since the start of the year. That represents an almost 10% increase in homicides over last year.
We're therefore calling on the government and our leaders of the JCF and the JDF to engage our people and put forward and execute sound and effective short-term violence strategies within our legal construct to mount a credible and sustained effort to neutralize these gangs, to reduce the wanton and horrific loss of lives. This would go a long way in restoring confidence and providing some comfort and hope in us all.
In the latest RJR Gleaner Don Anderson poll, over 90% of Jamaicans said they had little or no confidence in the police. Cordian Barrett, TVJ News.
Economist makes positive recommendations for St. Kitts and Nevis despite negative economic outlook. More in this SKN Newsline report with Andre Huey.
The forecast of the economy of St. Kitts and Nevis, like the global economy, is not a good one, says development economist Peter Adrian. However, Mr. Adrian believes the new Labour Party government has a glorious opportunity to transform the local economy and transfer wealth to its citizens and residents. Speaking in an interview with SK Newsline this week, Mr. Adrian said while the economic outlook is not a good one, the government has a chance to improve on what the previous administration did in keeping the economy stable.
This government, more than its predecessor, is doubly challenged. You see, the predecessor was supposed to keep civil society alive and to maintain, if you want, the framework of an economy, hoping that when the virus passes, then we could continue because we have an economy which is a network of production and distribution and consumption. But now that, although the argument is, some of the literature say we are not exactly in the post-COVID, others say we are at the end, but its remnant will be with us. But basically what we are seeing, we are in a trough where we are beginning a new journey. Now, if that is true, the new government will have to be evaluated on the basis of how well they stabilize the economy and on the basis of how well they grow the economy. They have to stabilize the economy and they have to grow the economy, unlike Dr. Timothy Harris, who had to maintain some level of stability. And that he did later on, I'll explain, by creating government spending and creating consumption by moving subsidy and transfer.
One area Mr. Adrian believes should be looked at is improving the opportunities to further develop the digital economy. Full interview with Mr. Adrian will air on the SK Newsline Facebook page and YouTube channel on Thursday at 10 a.m. Andre Huey, SKN Newsline.
Hubbard's is once again innovating the way you shop with its new online store, providing 24-hour shopping convenience. You can shop now for appliances, hardware, houseware, building material, and more. Free delivery island-wide. Start shopping now at hubbardshardware.gd. Safe, convenient, reliable.
I am Eddie Frederick. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.